He was standing in the doorway of my hospital room, holding a bouquet of flowers he'd clearly grabbed from the gift shop downstairs, smiling like he hadn't spent the last 4 days assuming I was dead. And for a second, just 1 second, I almost let myself believe the flowers were real. I need to back up. My brother and I grew up in a small house outside of Sudbury, Ontario. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A driveway that needed resurfacing every other year because of the freeze-thaw cycles. Our parents weren't wealthy, but they were careful. Dad worked in mining operations management. Mom did bookkeeping for a dental office. They saved everything. Not because they had grand plans, but because they'd both grown up with nothing, and the memory of that never left them. When they died, Dad first, then Mom 14 months later. Like she'd just been waiting to follow him. They left behind a house that had been paid off for 6 years, 2 modest RRSPs, and a life insurance policy that named me and my brother equally as beneficiaries. The total, split 2 ways, came to just over $400,000 each. I was 31. I'd spent the last 3 years working as an administrative coordinator at a hospital in Toronto, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Scarborough, driving a 2017 Civic with 200,000 kilometers on it. I wasn't struggling, but I wasn't comfortable either. That inheritance felt like a door opening. My brother was 34, living in Barrie, and had been between opportunities. His words, for the better part of 2 years. We were never close the way some siblings are, not enemies either. We just lived parallel lives that rarely intersected. Christmas, the occasional birthday text. A phone call when something important happened. After Mom died, we got closer out of necessity. There were decisions to make, an estate to handle, a house to sell. And for about 6 months, it felt like we might actually become the kind of siblings who talked on purpose. Then the money cleared. The first ask came in February, about 3 months after the estate settled. He called on a Tuesday evening and spent 20 minutes asking how I was doing before he got to it. He needed to borrow $40,000. There was a business opportunity, a franchise, he said. A franchise of what? I asked. He was vague. Something in the food sector. He'd explain more when the details were finalized. He just needed the capital now because the window was closing. I said no. He wasn't angry. He said he understood. He asked again in April, a different amount this time. $25,000. Just to cover some bills while he sorted things out. He'd been having trouble with his landlord. His car needed work. He had a line of credit that was sitting at a bad interest rate, and he wanted to consolidate. I said I was sorry, but I wasn't in a position to lend money right now. That one did make him a little cold. Not angry exactly. Just quieter. Clipped. The call ended faster than it started. By the summer, I'd stopped hearing from him much. A like on an Instagram post here and there. A thumbs up emoji on a text I sent about Mom's birthday. I told myself it was fine. People go through phases. Grief does strange things. He'd come around. I booked a trip to Iceland for September. Solo travel. Something I'd always wanted to do. 10 days. I figured it was a way to reset after everything. I came back feeling better than I had in years. 3 weeks after I got home, my brother called to say he was coming to Toronto for the weekend. He wanted to see me. He had some things he wanted to talk through. Family stuff, he said. Moving forward stuff, I said of course. I told him he could stay in my spare room. He showed up on a Friday night with a backpack and a 6-pack of steam whistle, and we sat at my kitchen table and it felt almost normal. He asked about Iceland. I showed him pictures. He told me about a woman he'd been seeing. He didn't give me her name, just called her someone from the gym, and said things were going well. He seemed lighter than he'd been in months. Saturday was fine too. We went for breakfast on the Danforth. We walked around the market. He picked up a candle for someone from the gym, and I bought coffee beans, and it felt like a normal sibling day. Sunday morning, he suggested we drive out to Haliburton. Visit the lake where our family used to rent a cottage when we were kids. I hadn't been back since I was maybe 16. The idea of it made me feel something I didn't have a word for. Nostalgic and sad and hopeful all at once. I said yes. The drive up was 2 hours. We talked the whole way. Old memories. Things about our parents we'd never said out loud before. He remembered details I'd forgotten. I reminded him of things he'd buried. By the time we got to the lake, I felt like I was grieving and healing at the same time. And I didn't know it was possible to do zoots in the same afternoon. We walked out to the end of the old dock. The lake was gray and flat. It was late October and there weren't any other cars in the lot. A few geese. Some dead leaves moving across the water. He said, I need you to know I love you. I thought it was about Mom. I said, I know, I love you too. He hugged me. A real one, not a side hug, the kind we hadn't shared since the day of Mom's funeral. And then he said he had to use the washroom and he'd be right back. And he walked up the dock toward the parking lot. I stood there looking at the lake. I was thinking about a summer, when I was maybe 9, when Mom had taught me to identify different kinds of clouds. We were standing on this exact dock. I remembered her pointing up and saying the word cumulonimbus, like it was the most wonderful word she'd ever said. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough that I started to feel the cold settling in through my jacket. I turned around. The The parking lot was empty. My brother's car was gone. I thought there'd been some misunderstanding. Maybe he'd seen something down the road. Maybe he'd gotten a call and pulled out to get better signal. I walked up from the dock to the lot, and then to the road, and there was nothing in either direction. My phone had one bar. I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted, nothing. I called again. The temperature was dropping fast and I wasn't dressed for it. I had a light fall jacket. The kind that's fine when you're moving between a warm car and a warm building, but completely wrong for standing on an empty road, an hour outside of Minden. I started walking toward where I thought the main road was, but I'd only been to this lake as a kid and I didn't actually know the roads. It got dark faster than I expected. By the time a transport truck driver saw me and pulled over, I was shaking so hard I could barely get my words out. He had the heat blasting in the cab. He gave me a bottle of water and a granola bar. He pulled from somewhere behind his seat and he called 911 himself because my fingers weren't working well enough to dial. The paramedics who arrived said my core temperature was low enough that they weren't taking chances. I was hypothermic. They put me in the ambulance and drove me to the hospital in Minden. I was unconscious before we arrived. I don't remember the next 2 days. I know what happened because a nurse named Deb told me afterward. She had the kind of no-nonsense warmth that makes you trust someone immediately. I was admitted under my own name, treated for hypothermia and mild frostbite on 2 fingers, and I stabilized within 24 hours. But I had a secondary infection that spiked my fever, and they kept me sedated for a second day while they got it under control. On the 3rd day, I woke up. There was a bag of saline hanging beside me. A window with a view of a parking lot. Fluorescent light. The particular smell of hospital air that I knew from work and had never thought I'd experience from the patient side. Deb came in when she saw me stir. She checked my vitals, adjusted something on the IV, and then she said, carefully, a family member has been calling to check on your condition, your brother. She paused in a way that said more than the pause should have. He called the first time about 4 hours after you came in, she said. He identified himself as your next of kin. He asked whether you had any documentation with you, whether you had a wallet. I looked at her. He asked specifically about your insurance coverage, she said. He asked if you'd been coherent enough to sign anything. I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with my body temperature, she said. He called twice more. Yesterday, he showed up in person. I sat up too fast and had to close my eyes against the vertigo. We didn't tell him anything, she said. When he arrived at the desk, we had no record of a patient by your name. That's standard protocol. When we have reason to be concerned, we flag the file. Anyone asking about you gets a non-conservums. You don't exist in the system until we decide otherwise. I asked her how she'd known to flag it. She said the way he asked about the insurance coverage on the first call was enough. In her 20 years of nursing, she'd learned to recognize the difference between a worried family member and someone taking inventory. I asked her if he'd been back. She said he'd called again that morning. I asked her to get me someone I could call. Not a family member, a lawyer. My parents' estate had been handled by a firm in Sudbury, but I'd also done my own will update the previous spring through a lawyer in Toronto. A woman I'd found through a referral from a coworker. She was sharp and calm, and she picked up when I called, even though it was late in the afternoon and I was objectively not her emergency. I told her what had happened. All of it. The lake, the walk, the cold, waking up here. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, tell me about your financial accounts. Does he have signing authority on anything? Is there a POA? There was. I'd set up a basic power of attorney document when I was doing my will, because the lawyer had said it was standard practice, and I'd named my brother because I didn't have anyone else. It gave him authority to act on my behalf if I was incapacitated. She said, very steadily, a POA is only valid while you're alive and incapacitated. Now that you're conscious and capable of making decisions, it's suspended. He cannot use it. Then she said something that made everything click into focus. But if he doesn't know you're conscious, or if he's been telling people you're not, he may be trying to use it while he still thinks he can. I asked her what I should do. She said, let me make some calls. Don't tell your brother you're awake. Don't contact him. I'll be in touch within the hour. True to her word, she called back in 40 minutes. She'd spoken with a colleague who did criminal law. The situation, abandoning someone in conditions likely to cause bodily harm, combined with the financial movements he might have already attempted, was serious enough to warrant a report to the OPP. She'd already started that process with my consent, which I gave her immediately. She also told me something I hadn't known. My brother had called my bank that morning. He'd told them I was incapacitated, and he had POA, and he wanted to discuss the status of my accounts. The bank had put a hold on everything pending verification of my status. Standard procedure when a POA claim comes in, which meant he hadn't been able to access anything. But he'd tried. That was what I needed to hear. Deb helped me understand what would happen next. The OPP had been informed and an officer would be coming to take my statement. My file would stay flagged. No information given to anyone, including my brother, about my condition or location. If he came back, they would call the police. He came back the next morning. I was sitting up in bed, and Deb came in and told me before it happened. She'd seen him arrive at the front desk on the camera monitor at the nursing station. She asked if I wanted her to stay. I said yes. The OPP officer, who had taken my statement the night before, was also in the building. Not by coincidence. My brother came through the door of my room, carrying a bouquet of flowers he'd clearly grabbed from the gift shop downstairs. Carnations, and a bit of baby's breath in cellophane wrap. The kind that costs $11.99 and lives in a bucket by the cash register. He was smiling. He stopped when he saw me sitting up. The smile didn't fall exactly. It shifted. Something behind his eyes recalculated. "You're awake," he said. "I am," I said. He said, "I've been so worried. I've been calling. I couldn't get any information." "I know you've been calling," I said. "I know what you asked them." He started to say something else, and the OPP officer stepped in from the hallway. My brother looked at the officer, then at me, then at the flowers in his hand like he'd forgotten they were there. The officer didn't rush. She introduced herself. She told my brother that she'd like to speak with him. She told him he wasn't under arrest, but that there were some matters she needed to discuss and he was welcome to have a lawyer present if he preferred. He chose not to. I think he believed, in that moment, that there was still a way out of this. There wasn't. The OPP had pulled records of his calls to the hospital and to my bank. My lawyer had documented the POA situation and the timeline of events. I gave a formal statement from my hospital bed about being left at the lake and what he'd said before he left. Specifically, "I need you to know I love you," which I now understood was the kind of thing you say when you don't plan on seeing someone again. He was charged with criminal negligence causing bodily harm and attempted fraud. His lawyer, one he scrambled to find in the days that followed, told him the evidence wasn't in his favor. The bank records alone made things difficult. The hospital call logs made them worse. The fact that he'd driven 400 kilometers back to Toronto after leaving me by a frozen lake and waited 3 days before making any contact made them worst of all. He eventually entered a guilty plea to avoid trial. The criminal negligence charge was the one that stuck. He was sentenced to 18 months of house arrest, 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and was ordered to repay the legal costs I incurred during the process. I revoked the POA the day I left the hospital. My lawyer helped me update every financial document I had, new account numbers, new beneficiary designations, new will. She's also connected me with a victim services coordinator, who checked in with me every few weeks for the first few months. That part surprised me. I hadn't expected to need it, and then I did. I still live in Toronto. I still drive the Civic, though it's got a new set of winter tires now. Something I clearly should have dealt with before a trip to Haliburton in late October. Deb from the Minden Hospital sent me a card a few months after I was discharged. It said, "People show you who they are when they think you can't see them. You were watching." I think about that a lot. I also think about my mother, standing on that dock when I was 9, pointing at the sky. She was teaching me to identify what was coming before it arrived. She said, if you know the name of a cloud, you're not afraid of it. You just know what kind of weather to expect. I know what kind of weather my brother is now. I know his name, and I don't owe him shelter from it anymore.